The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Proverbs 9:10. The sun rose softly over ancient Jerusalem, brushing its golden light against rooftops and temple walls. The city stirred awake, unaware that within the palace of cedar and gold, the wisest man who ever lived was writing words that would echo through eternity. His name was Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, judge of hearts, and student of heaven. But what most people never knew, what was hidden beneath the surface of his famous Proverbs and royal chronicles, were the teachings he reserved for only a few. These were not the words spoken to impress kings or written to instruct children. These were his lost teachings, reflections whispered in solitude, born of both brilliance and regret. Solomon's wisdom had not come cheaply. It was the result of long nights beneath the stars, where he questioned the meaning of wealth, power, and even divine favor. Though the world saw his glory, his gold-covered temple, his 1,000 songs, his magnificent throne, few ever saw the man who wrestled with the limits of knowledge and the temptations of the human heart. In his private chambers, Solomon kept scrolls that were never read by the public. They were written not for scholars or priests, but for those who would one day seek truth over tradition, understanding over ritual. In those scrolls, he wrote of the balance between light and shadow, the invisible line between wisdom and madness, between divine insight and human pride. He wrote, "The greatest danger of knowledge is to mistake it for righteousness. The fool with a crown believes himself a god, while the wise man with ashes remembers he is dust." This was not the Solomon people quoted in polite conversation. This was a man haunted by what he knew. He had seen how the pursuit of truth could turn to arrogance, how a gift could become a curse when handled without humility. At night, the palace lamps flickered as Solomon sat alone beside a table of bronze, his quill scratching softly against parchment. Around him, the sound of distant harps echoed from the courtyards, yet his mind wandered far beyond the walls of Jerusalem, into the mysteries of creation, the nature of the soul, and the hidden structure of reality. He pondered the forces that governed existence, not just the laws of kingship, but the unseen patterns of life itself. "There is a rhythm," he once wrote, "that governs all things. To know wisdom is not to break the rhythm, but to move in harmony with it." Solomon believed that everything, from the rising of the sun to the whisper of the wind, carried divine instruction. "The wise," he said, "hear the speech of the trees and understand the counsel of rivers." In this way, he saw creation not as a silent backdrop, but as a living scripture, teaching lessons that words alone could never convey. But even as his understanding deepened, Solomon began to sense a shadow growing within his wisdom. The same insight that made him beloved of God also exposed him to the darkest truths of human nature. He saw envy in the hearts of allies, deceit behind the smiles of courtiers, and the slow corrosion of virtue beneath the weight of comfort and abundance. His heart, once filled with purity, began to tremble with questions. "How can a man remain righteous," he asked, "when knowledge reveals the vanity of all things?" And so began the secret writings, the lost teachings. In them, Solomon recorded what he could not speak aloud: the spiritual laws that governed both rise and ruin, the wisdom that came not from divine vision alone, but from deep repentance. He wrote, "Wisdom is not the crown, but the burden. To see the world as it truly is to grieve for what it could be." One evening, a servant named Azariah, young and curious, entered Solomon's chamber quietly to deliver oil for the lamps. There he found the king surrounded by open scrolls and a faint scent of frankincense. Solomon did not rebuke him for interrupting. Instead, he looked up and said softly, "Come, child. You may learn something that few will ever understand." Azariah hesitated, then sat beside him. Solomon unrolled a small parchment and pointed to the first of his hidden proverbs, one not found in the public scriptures. The fool seeks light only to boast that he is not in darkness. The wise seek darkness that they might understand the value of light. Azariah did not understand, but he listened. And that, Solomon said, was the beginning of wisdom. Do not rush to know, he advised. The truth reveals itself only to those who are patient enough to bear it. That night marked the beginning of Solomon's secret school, not of buildings and books, but of moments shared between a teacher and those willing to seek understanding beyond appearances. He taught that gratitude was a form of worship greater than sacrifice, that silence could speak more truth than speech, and that the greatest power was self-control. And yet, for all his insight, Solomon's eyes carried sorrow. Wisdom, he whispered, is a lamp that can burn the one who holds it. Outside, Jerusalem glittered in gold, but within the king's chamber, a different kind of treasure was forming, one invisible to history, yet eternal in its impact. For those who would one day rediscover his lost teachings, Solomon left behind a promise hidden in his scrolls. When knowledge becomes heavy and the heart grows weary with understanding, seek humility, for there lies the doorway to the divine. And with that, he dipped his pen once more in ink, ready to write the next revelation that would outlive every monument, every jewel, and even the throne itself. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs 4:23. Morning sunlight filtered through carved cedar screens, scattering patterns of light across Solomon's chamber. The king sat quietly at his writing table, a half-finished scroll before him. His eyes, deep with thought, reflected both the brilliance of revelation and the weariness of a man who had seen too much. Solomon was no longer writing for kings or priests. These words were for the generations unborn, for those who would someday hunger for truth in a world filled with noise. His servant, Azariah, entered again, carrying a small jug of water from the Gihon spring. Solomon gestured for him to sit. "Do you know," Solomon asked gently, "why wisdom flees from those who chase it too eagerly?" Azariah shook his head. "Because," the king said, smiling faintly, "they do not chase wisdom. They chase certainty. Wisdom does not dwell in certainty, but in the quiet space between knowing and not knowing." He turned back to his scroll and began to write, speaking softly as he did. "Do not trust the calm of the sea, nor the certainty of your thoughts. For both can change with a single breath of wind." The boy listened, captivated. Solomon spoke not like a ruler, but like a man unveiling the hidden architecture of the soul. "Men believe that power lies in control," he continued, "but true power lies in understanding what cannot be controlled and making peace with it." He told Azariah a story that few had heard. "When I was young," Solomon said, "I asked God not for riches nor for victory, but for wisdom to lead my people. And he granted it. But with wisdom came the ability to see every shadow beneath the sun, the deceit in the smile, the weariness in joy, the pride behind generosity. To see truth so clearly is both a gift and a wound." He paused and looked out toward the distant temple gleaming in the sun. "I built that house for the Almighty," he said softly. "But what I did not realize then was that the true temple must first be built within the heart." Azariah frowned slightly. "The heart, my king?" "Yes," Solomon replied, his voice steady. "For where else can the Spirit dwell? Men build walls of stone and call them holy, yet fill their hearts with envy, pride, and fear. Tell me, what holiness can stand within such a heart?" "The lost teaching of all religion," he said, "is that worship begins with cleansing the inner room." He unrolled another parchment, This one bore strange symbols, circles, lines, and markings that looked almost mathematical. These, Solomon said, are the measures of balance. They represent the divine rhythm in all things. The same pattern that guides the stars also governs human thought. When a man lives in harmony with it, he finds peace. When he fights against it, he calls chaos into his own house. The boy studied the marks, his brow furrowed. Can a man truly live without chaos? Solomon smiled. No, child, but he can learn to listen to it. Every storm teaches a rhythm. The wise do not silence their storms, they learn their music. He dipped his pen again and wrote a line that glowed faintly in the slanting light. Peace is not the absence of struggle. It is the presence of understanding within it. Outside, the court bustled with merchants and messengers. The sounds of commerce, laughter, and disputes floated faintly through the open window. Solomon turned to Azariah and said, "Look at them. Each man believes he fights alone, for bread, for love, for honor. Yet they are threads in a single tapestry. When one pulls too hard, the whole fabric strains. Then what should a man do, my lord?" Azariah asked. "Remember that his choices echo beyond himself," Solomon said. "A single act of kindness can heal generations. A single lie can poison them. This is the secret of dominion, not ruling others, but ruling the self." He wrote again, this time slower, more deliberately. "He who masters his own heart rules a kingdom greater than empires." The boy sat silently, his eyes wide. Solomon looked at him and chuckled softly. "Do not mistake my age for peace, Azariah. Wisdom does not make life easier, it makes it clearer. And sometimes clarity is the heaviest crown." For a moment, both were quiet. Then the king spoke again, his tone low and reflective. "The world remembers me for my wealth and my women, for the temple and the throne. But what they will never know is how often I envied the shepherd who could sleep without wondering if his people would still love him in the morning." Azariah asked, "Does wisdom bring happiness, my lord?" Solomon closed his eyes. "No," he said, "it brings understanding. And with understanding comes responsibility. But in that burden there is a strange kind of peace, the peace of walking in truth, even when it hurts." He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Listen to me, Azariah. The lost teachings I give you are not for power, but for balance. Seek not to be above men, but within them. For God does not dwell in the high towers of pride, but in the humble breath of compassion." The wind stirred through the open window, lifting a few pages from the table. Solomon smiled as if recognizing an old friend in that invisible breeze. "Even the wind," he said, "teaches the wise. It bends what is stiff, but carries what is light." Then, as the lamps were lit for evening, Solomon wrote one final line for the day, one that would outlast even the stones of his temple. "When your heart becomes quiet enough to hear the whisper of God, guard that silence, for within it lies the wisdom of all creation." And so the night fell gently over Jerusalem. The boy departed and Solomon remained, writing into the darkness, his hand guided by the same unseen rhythm that moved the stars above. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. Proverbs 4:7. The moon rose over Jerusalem like a silver coin placed upon the dark velvet of heaven. In the quiet of his chamber, Solomon sat alone once more, surrounded by half-burnt lamps and open scrolls. The fragrance of frankincense lingered, mingling with the still air of contemplation. The city slept, but the king's mind did not. He was deep within thought, listening not to the world, but to the quiet murmur of his own soul. On the table before him lay a parchment, filled with verses he had not yet shared with anyone. They were not decrees or royal wisdoms meant for his scribes. These were words born from the hidden places of his heart. As he traced the lines of ink with his finger, he whispered to himself, "Knowledge fills the mind, but wisdom fills the life." A faint knock echoed through the silence. It was Azariah again, the young servant who had now become more of a pupil than a servant. Solomon motioned him to enter. The boy bowed low, then stood in respectful silence. "Sit," Solomon said softly. "It is time you learned the second mystery, the one they will never teach in the schools of men." Azariah sat beside him, his eyes reflecting both reverence and curiosity. "The first mystery," Solomon began, "was balance. The second is the voice." "The voice, my lord?" "Yes," said the king. "Every man hears three voices in his life: the voice of the world, the voice of his own heart, and the voice of God. But most live and die hearing only the first." He leaned forward, his words slow and measured. "The voice of the world is loud. It tells you who to be, what to seek, whom to fear. It fills your ears so completely that you begin to mistake its clamor for truth. The voice of your own heart is softer. It speaks through longing and restlessness. But the voice of God, that one is a whisper, so still that you must become silent within yourself to hear it." Azariah's brows furrowed. "How can one tell which voice is real, my lord?" Solomon smiled faintly. "By what it leaves behind. The voice of the world leaves you anxious. The voice of the heart leaves you yearning. But the voice of God leaves you at peace, even when it breaks you." He turned to one of the scrolls and unrolled it, revealing an old saying written in gold ink: "The fool shouts his truth to be heard. The wise man whispers, for truth needs no noise." "When I was young," Solomon said, "I believed that wisdom meant speaking more. Now I know that it means listening more. The noise of pride deafens us from divine counsel." He looked at Azariah with the kind of gaze that seemed to pierce the veil between teacher and disciple. "Remember, child, when your heart grows still enough, even silence becomes a teacher." Outside, the wind sighed through the olive trees, and the faint sound of distant singing drifted from the city below. Solomon's expression softened as he listened. "Do you hear that?" he asked. "Yes, my lord." "The songs of the Levites in the courtyard." "Indeed," Solomon said. "They sing to please God, but what they do not realize is that God listens to their hearts more than their voices. You see, Azariah, worship is not a song. It is a posture of the soul." He paused, then wrote carefully on a fresh piece of parchment. "The truest prayer has no words. It is the stillness of the heart before its maker." Azariah's eyes filled with wonder. "Then even silence can be holy?" Solomon nodded. "Yes, in silence you meet the one who is beyond words. Men build altars of gold and stone, yet the holiest altar is built of sincerity." He leaned back, his face weary yet luminous in the lamplight. "There was a night," he said, "when I sat alone on the balcony of my palace, questioning everything, my wealth, my glory, my name. And in that moment of doubt, I heard, not with my ears but with my soul, a voice that said, 'Be still. I am here.' That is when I understood. God does not dwell in temples made by human hands, but in the quiet corners of a humble heart." Azariah whispered, "Did that voice speak to you again?" "Many times," Solomon replied softly, "but it is never the same. Sometimes it comforts, sometimes it corrects, sometimes it disappears, to teach me to seek it again. The voice of God is like the wind. You cannot see it, but you can see its work." The boy looked thoughtful. "Then wisdom is not learned, my lord. It is heard." Solomon smiled warmly. "Ah, you are learning faster than I did." He reached for his pen once more and wrote, Do not chase wisdom as a treasure to own. Listen for it as a friend who visits and departs and returns when you are ready." The lamps flickered as if agreeing. Solomon turned his gaze to the open window where the stars glowed in silent order. "Look at them, Azariah. Every star follows its course, never boasting, never straying. That is wisdom, to shine where you are placed, without envy of another's light." He sighed deeply. "I built a kingdom and thought myself wise. But only when I began to listen did I realize the greatest throne is the one within, ruled by peace." He folded the parchment, sealing it with wax. "These are not teachings for the masses," he said. "The world is not ready for them, but someday a seeker will find these words, and their soul will awaken." Azariah asked quietly, "And what shall I do with these lessons, my lord?" Solomon looked at him with affection. "Live them. For wisdom not lived is wisdom lost." The king rose, his robe shimmering faintly in the moonlight. He placed a hand upon the boy's head and spoke gently. "May your ears always hear beyond the noise, and may your heart always rest where silence speaks." And as the night deepened, Solomon returned to his seat, the ink still wet with truths too sacred for his age. The lamps burned low, and the voice of the wind whispered through the chamber, as if heaven itself was listening. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Ecclesiastes 1:18. The dawn over Jerusalem was pale gold, and the air still carried the fragrance of night. The palace stirred slowly awake. Servants began their quiet routines. Priests recited morning blessings, and doves cooed from the courtyard stones. Yet within the private chambers of Solomon, silence still reigned. He sat alone before the wide balcony overlooking the city. The scrolls from the night before remained open, ink dried upon words that had cost him sleep. In that still hour between darkness and day, his thoughts were heavier than his crown. When Azariah entered, he found the king not writing, not reading, but staring at his hands as though they held both the power and the curse of creation. Solomon did not turn. "Azariah," he said softly, "do you know what it means to hold light?" The boy hesitated. "To understand truth, my lord?" "No," Solomon replied. "To hold light is to carry a fire that burns within you. The more brightly it shines, the more shadows it reveals." He rose and walked toward the balcony, his robe catching the first light of dawn. "This is the third mystery," he said. "The burden of light." Azariah followed quietly. The city below shimmered with life, the cries of merchants, the clang of metal, the hum of prayer. Yet Solomon's eyes looked beyond it all, as though he were seeing a deeper kingdom, one that lay beneath and above the world of men. "Light," Solomon said, "was the first gift given to creation. But men think it is only brightness, joy, truth, revelation. They forget that light also exposes what is hidden. When wisdom enters a heart, it brings understanding, but it also brings sorrow, for it shows you the world as it truly is." He turned to the boy. "That is why fools laugh easily. They have not yet seen enough to grieve." Azariah listened, unsure if the king spoke from his heart or his wounds. Solomon continued, "When I was young, I prayed for wisdom above all things. God answered me, and I rejoiced. I saw patterns in the stars, secrets in the wind, meanings in the rise and fall of nations. But as I grew older, I saw something else, the vanity of it all, the endless cycle of birth and death, hope and loss, building and ruin. Every truth I uncovered led to another question, and every joy I touched carried its opposite within it." He paused. "The world's greatest lesson, Azariah, is this: light does not destroy darkness, it defines it." The boy frowned softly. "Then why seek wisdom, my lord, if it brings such grief?" Solomon smiled faintly, a tired, knowing smile. "Because grief is not the end of wisdom. It is the doorway to compassion." He stepped back from the balcony, his shadow long upon the floor. When a man sees suffering and does not turn away, when he feels the pain of others and still blesses God, that is when wisdom becomes love. "And love," he whispered, "is the only light that does not burn." Azariah looked at the king, not as a servant but as a son gazing upon a father's soul. "My lord," he said softly, "were you lonely in your wisdom?" Solomon closed his eyes for a long moment. "Every wise man is lonely, child. For what he sees, others cannot. What he understands, others will not. Wisdom is a crown of thorns that glitters beautifully from afar." He sat again by the table, unrolling another parchment, one of his oldest writings. Upon it were the early Proverbs, written when he was still young and filled with holy fire. His eyes softened as he read his own words, written by a man he no longer was. "Happy is the man who finds wisdom and the one who gains understanding, for her profit is better than silver, and her gain more than fine gold." He smiled faintly, then murmured, "Yes, but they did not tell you the rest, that she also brings the weight of knowing too much." Then, with a trembling hand, he added a line beneath it, "And yet, though she wounds, her wounds heal deeper than joy." Azariah spoke quietly, "Is that why you built the temple, my lord? To find peace for the things wisdom could not answer?" Solomon nodded slowly. "Yes, the temple was not only for God, it was for me, a house of stillness to quiet the storm within my own mind. I thought perhaps if I built a perfect place for his presence, I would finally understand him." He looked toward the distant temple spires gilded by sunrise. "But the more I sought to build for God, the more I realized he does not dwell in marble or cedar. His temple is the human heart." Azariah's eyes glistened. "Then your greatest building, my lord, was not the temple." Solomon smiled softly. "No, it was the space within me where I finally learned to listen." The king rose and walked to the great bronze mirror beside his desk. He studied his reflection, the lines upon his face, the weary light in his eyes. "The burden of light," he murmured, "is to see too clearly. But the gift of God is to still believe in beauty, even when you have seen its fragility." He turned back to the boy. "Remember this, Azariah. If you wish to walk with God, you must be willing to walk through darkness, for it is in the darkness that his light becomes real." Then Solomon dipped his quill once more and wrote the final words of that morning's lesson. "Wisdom is not to escape sorrow, but to see through it. For where sorrow ends, love begins." As the sun climbed higher, its light filled the chamber, warm, golden, unwavering. Solomon's face softened in its glow, and for a fleeting moment he seemed at peace. And in that silence, Azariah realized the king was not teaching him how to know, he was teaching him how to see. "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Proverbs 4:23. The palace was quieter than usual that afternoon. A strange calm hung over the golden halls, disturbed only by the distant hum of construction and the rustle of papyrus scrolls in the library. Solomon sat within that library, a sanctuary of cedar, ivory, and candlelight, surrounded by the countless writings he had gathered over his lifetime. Some were from Egypt, others from the East, and still others from the deserts of Arabia. Yet among all those words, his eyes kept returning to one small worn parchment that bore his own handwriting. It was titled, "The Shadow of the Heart." Azariah entered silently, carrying a clay cup of water. The boy had learned to tread softly in Solomon's presence, for even silence seemed sacred in the room of the wise. The king looked up and motioned for him to sit. "Today," Solomon began, "we speak of the fourth mystery, the one no crown can conquer. The boy leaned forward. "You mean the heart, my lord?" Solomon smiled faintly. "Yes, the heart, the throne within the man." He held up the old parchment. "I wrote these words when I was young. The heart is pure until it learns to desire." I thought I understood them then, but I was a fool. Desire is not evil, Azariah. It is the breath of creation itself. Without it, we would never seek, never build, never love. Yet desire unguarded becomes a storm. He rose and walked between the shelves, his robe whispering softly against the stone floor. When I first sat on this throne, my heart was full of noble intentions. I wished to rule with justice, to bring peace to the people, to honor the God who gave me wisdom. But slowly, ambition crept in, dressed as devotion. Pride entered disguised as gratitude, and before I knew it, the line between service and self became blurred. He stopped before a carved cedar panel depicting two lions locked in battle, one light, one dark. "Do you see this?" he asked. Azariah nodded. "Both lions live within us. The light roars for truth, the dark for desire. Most men try to kill the dark one, but wisdom teaches otherwise. You must not kill your shadow, you must learn to master it. For in mastering it, you discover your true strength." He turned and looked the boy straight in the eyes. That, Azariah, is the essence of the fourth mystery, the shadow of the heart. The boy hesitated. "But how does one master the shadow, my lord?" Solomon's gaze softened. "By knowing it, by facing it without fear. Every man's heart hides a wilderness, a place where pride, envy, and temptation dwell. The fool pretends it does not exist. The wise man enters it with light in his hand." He took the boy to a narrow window overlooking the temple. Its gleaming stones caught the afternoon sun, glowing almost white. "When I built that house for God," Solomon said, "I believed it would cleanse me. I thought holiness could be built from stone, but the true temple he desired was here." He pressed his palm to his chest. "Within me." Azariah lowered his head. "But you are Solomon the wise, my lord. Even your shadow must fear you." Solomon chuckled, not in pride, but in weary honesty. "Ah, if only wisdom made one invincible. No, child, wisdom only makes one more aware of the battle. The heart never stops wrestling with itself. Even kings wake in the night, haunted by their own reflections." He returned to his desk and took up a quill. "Listen carefully," he said. "Every sin begins not with the act, but with the thought we justify. Every fall begins with a whisper that says, 'This will not matter.' But the heart keeps record of all things, even the secrets we hide from ourselves." As he wrote, his words flowed like a prayer. "A man who rules a city and not his spirit is a prisoner in his own palace. To rule the world, one must first rule the wilderness within." Azariah's voice trembled. "So even the wisest can fall?" Solomon nodded. "Especially the wise. For pride often hides beneath wisdom, and we mistake our understanding for holiness. That is why I teach you these things, boy, so that when your heart begins to rise against you, you will not be surprised. You will meet your shadow and know its name." The room fell silent for a long time. The light from the window shifted, laying a golden path across the floor, a quiet symbol of the very balance Solomon spoke of. Light meeting shadow. Then, almost to himself, Solomon whispered, "When I look upon the great cities I have built, the ships I have sent, the wisdom I have shared, I realize none of it can quiet the storm within a man's heart. The true kingdom, Azariah, lies in mastering oneself." He sealed the parchment and handed it to the boy. "Keep this one safe. One day you'll understand it more than I ever could." Azariah accepted it reverently, sensing the gravity of the gift. Solomon smiled faintly. And remember this, the shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. Learn from it, and you will walk with both light and understanding. Outside, the sound of temple bells echoed across the city. Slow, rhythmic, ancient. Solomon stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the golden glow of the setting sun. And in that moment, it seemed that even the great King Solomon, the man who spoke with angels, who commanded nations, who knew the mysteries of creation, was still learning the simplest truth of all, that the greatest wisdom is not found in the stars nor written in scrolls, but born from the long, honest struggle of a heart learning to love rightly. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. The moon had risen high above Jerusalem, silvering the temple roofs and bathing the palace gardens in quiet light. The world seemed hushed, as if creation itself paused to listen. Solomon walked slowly through the courtyard, hands clasped behind his back, his robe trailing across the smooth stones that still held the warmth of day. He was alone, by choice. The sound of the fountains echoed softly, mingling with the night breeze that carried the scent of cedar and myrrh. Somewhere far off, a night bird called. In that stillness, the king's mind returned to the fifth mystery, the voice of silence. It had come to him not in the grandeur of ceremony, nor the brilliance of debate, but in a single quiet dawn many years ago, a time when he was neither king nor judge, but simply a seeker. He remembered sitting beneath a fig tree outside Gibeon, watching the sun lift over the hills, when a thought had whispered to him so softly that he nearly missed it. The greatest voice of wisdom is heard only when the world grows silent. That truth had followed him all his life, but only now, in the fullness of years, did he begin to understand its depth. He entered the hall of the pillars, vast, dim, and echoing, and sat upon the cold marble floor. No guards, no scribes, no counselors, only silence. For a long time he breathed slowly, letting his thoughts scatter like dust until even the sound of his own heartbeat felt sacred. When at last the silence deepened into stillness, he spoke softly to the unseen. Lord of all wisdom, I built you a house of stone, but I know now you dwell in the quiet. His words drifted into the air and were answered by silence, yet that silence spoke. It was not emptiness, but presence, not absence, but intimacy. It carried the memory of creation itself, when God had breathed light into the void. Azariah, unable to sleep, entered quietly and stopped at the threshold. He saw the king seated cross-legged, eyes closed, face illuminated by the moonlight that filtered through the lattice. For a moment the boy thought Solomon might be speaking with angels again. "My lord," he whispered. Solomon opened his eyes and smiled faintly. "Come closer, Azariah. Tonight we listen to the voice that does not shout." The boy knelt beside him. "Is it true, my lord, that God no longer speaks as he once did?" The king shook his head gently. He never ceased speaking. It is man who forgot how to hear. He reached for a lamp and dimmed its flame until the room was swallowed in shadow. "Tell me what you hear, boy." Azariah hesitated. "Nothing, my lord." "Only silence," Solomon nodded. "Good. That is where wisdom begins. Listen again, not with your ears, but with your spirit." The boy closed his eyes. At first, only the faint drip of water from a nearby basin reached him. Then, beneath that, he sensed the rhythm of his own breathing, and beneath even that, something deeper, an awareness vast and alive. He gasped softly. "It feels like peace," Solomon smiled. "Yes, the voice of silence. When you touch it, every question seems smaller, every fear less powerful. In that stillness, you remember who you truly are." He rose and walked to the window overlooking the sleeping city. "When I was young," he said, "I thought wisdom meant knowing everything. I filled this palace with scrolls and my mind with words. But now I see. Wisdom is not in the noise of knowledge, but in the quiet of understanding. Azariah followed his gaze. Then why does the world chase noise, my lord? Because silence reveals truth, Solomon said, and truth demands change. Most men would rather drown in distraction than confront themselves in stillness. The boy looked puzzled. But how can silence be a teacher? Solomon turned to him, his expression serene. Because silence has no pride, no agenda, no fear. It only shows what is. The proud man talks, the wise man listens, and the wisest learn to listen even when no words are spoken. He placed his hand on Azariah's shoulder. Remember this, child. The closer you draw to the heart of God, the quieter your mind becomes. When you feel lost, do not seek more voices. Seek stillness, for in stillness, the divine speaks in a language beyond sound. A faint smile crossed Solomon's face as he continued softly, "Even the stars obey that silence." They move with perfect harmony, not through command, but through understanding. So too must man learn to move with the rhythm of heaven. The night deepened, the lamps burned lower, and in the sacred quiet of that hour, something invisible passed between the teacher and his student. Not words, not doctrine, but presence. The kind of knowledge that cannot be written in scrolls. As Azariah finally lay down to rest, Solomon remained by the window, gazing at the stars. A cool wind brushed his face, and in its whisper, he heard again the ancient truth. "Be still, Solomon, and you will know me." He bowed his head, not as a king before a throne, but as a soul before its maker. And so the night passed, in silence, in peace, and in the quiet unveiling of the fifth mystery. The years had turned, and Solomon's throne stood taller than ever. Yet those who looked closely at the man behind the gold could see something changing. His eyes, once filled with divine fire, now flickered with quiet storms. Wisdom had made him mighty, but it had also made him heavy. The weight of knowing too much can make even a king feel small. Every morning he would walk to the outer gardens of his palace, where the sound of doves cooing mixed with the scent of frankincense. He would speak softly to the wind, as if it could carry his words to God. Why does understanding not bring peace, but restlessness? Why do I see beauty and futility intertwined? One of his scribes, a young man named Rehoboam, overheard him once and asked, "My lord, do you regret your wisdom?" Solomon smiled faintly. "Regret? Number. But wisdom is like the ocean, my son. It refreshes those who sip, but it drowns those who dive too deep." In those days, his teachings began to change. His proverbs, once sharp and practical, grew softer, almost sorrowful. He wrote not of victory, but of vanity, not of the world's order, but its fleetingness. "To everything there is a season," he said, "and a time for every purpose under heaven." He was no longer teaching how to rule, but how to endure. That was the hidden chapter the world rarely saw. Solomon, the man who began to see that wisdom without humility is like light without warmth. One night he invited the priests, poets, and elders of Israel to the hall of cedar. The golden lamps flickered as he stood before them, his crown glimmering in the dim light. "I have built temples," he said, "and cities that shall stand for ages. But the greatest temple is the heart that remembers its maker." A silence fell over the hall. Even the incense smoke seemed to hang motionless in the air. Solomon's voice softened as he added, "When man forgets this truth, he begins to worship himself." That evening he shared a parable that would later vanish from most scrolls. A king built a tower so high that he could touch the stars. He said to himself, "Now I am close to heaven." But the stars only shimmered farther away. Then a humble shepherd walked up the hill below and lifted his hands in prayer, and heaven came down to him. Many in the hall did not understand, but a few did. They saw that Solomon was no longer speaking as a ruler, but as a soul searching for the same light he once believed he had already found. Later that night, as the palace quieted, Solomon returned to his chamber alone. He looked at the golden artifacts around him, gifts from Egypt, spices from Sheba, and scrolls from Tyre, and sighed. "All this," he whispered, "and yet what remains when a man's heart grows distant from the one who gave it all?" That whisper, carried through the marble halls, was never recorded in Scripture, but the angels heard it. It was the sound of a king beginning to see that wisdom stripped of love becomes sorrow, and that the true secret of life was never to possess understanding, but to walk humbly with it. In that fragile moment, the wisest man on earth became, once again, a seeker. And perhaps that is where the truest wisdom begins. The moon hung low over Jerusalem that night, casting silver shadows upon the palace terraces. The air was still, heavy with a quiet that seemed to listen. Inside the chamber of the king, a single lamp flickered beside a parchment sealed with wax. The scroll of light, the most mysterious of Solomon's writings, whispered about by scribes yet unseen by most eyes. It was said he wrote it not with ink, but with tears. He began it during a season of solitude, when the noise of court life could no longer fill the emptiness within. The scroll opened not with a command or proverb, but a confession. "I built walls of stone, and within them found silence. I gathered treasures, and they whispered nothing. I sought wisdom, and it revealed my own foolishness. Only when I bowed low did I see the light that does not burn." This was not the voice of the Solomon people knew. This was a man stripped of glory, speaking as dust before his maker. The scroll continued. "The secret of heaven is not hidden from the wise, but from the proud who call themselves wise. The heart that bends shines brighter than gold. The soul that forgives rules greater kingdoms than any throne." He called it the Scroll of Light, because in his final years, Solomon began to see that divine wisdom was not stored in the mind, but in the heart that listens. One dawn, when the horizon was painted in soft amber, he summoned his trusted scribe, Rehoboam, and placed the scroll before him. "Do not let this be lost," Solomon said. "The world will remember me for my proverbs and my judgments. But this," he pointed to the parchment, "this is what heaven taught me after I had everything." Rehoboam hesitated. "Father, will the people understand it?" "They may not now," Solomon said, "but one day when men grow weary of their own wisdom, they will seek it. And when they do, tell them that I too was once lost beneath my crown." The scroll of light, as legend tells, contained verses about creation and the soul's return to its divine source. He wrote that light was not just a thing seen, but a being known. "It lives," he wrote, "in every breath of mercy, in every act of forgiveness, in the gaze of those who love without condition. That is the eternal flame God placed in us before time began." But there was something else, something the priests tried to conceal. In the final passages, Solomon spoke of a future teacher, one who would come with words even greater than his. "There shall arise one," the scroll read, "who speaks as if heaven itself breathes through his lips. His wisdom will not dwell in palaces, but in hearts. And the proud will not know him, but the humble will call him Lord." The priests who read this were troubled. Some said Solomon had foreseen the coming of the Messiah. Others feared such words might divide the kingdom, so they hid the scroll away. But not before Rehoboam copied a single line into his own memory, one that would echo through generations. "When love becomes your law, wisdom becomes your crown." And thus, while the world remembers Solomon for his judgments and riches, a quieter truth lies buried beneath the centuries, that in his final years, the wisest man who ever lived discovered that all wisdom points to love, and all knowledge bows before humility. That was the light no temple could contain, and it glowed, faint but eternal, in the heart of a king who finally saw what truly mattered. When King Solomon passed, the palace fell silent in a way that words could not mend. His servants wept not for their king, but for the voice that had taught them what it meant to live with understanding. The air in Jerusalem seemed dimmer, as though even the sun bowed its light in mourning. Among the many treasures Solomon left behind, gold, ivory, vessels of silver, and scrolls of wisdom, there was one thing no one could find: the scroll of light. It had vanished. Rehoboam, his son, ordered the scribes to search the royal library. They combed through thousands of parchments, every verse, every word the king had ever written. But the scroll that Solomon said contained the heart of all wisdom was nowhere to be found. Some whispered that it was stolen by a priest, fearful of its prophecy, the one that spoke of a future teacher who would surpass Solomon himself. Others believed it had been taken up by angels, too sacred for mortal hands. But there was one story, told only in secret, that the scroll had not been stolen at all. They said that on the night before Solomon's death, a soft wind moved through his chamber. The king, weak but awake, took the scroll in his trembling hands and whispered a prayer. Let the truth within these words walk with those who seek light. Hide it not in palaces but in hearts that listen. And when morning came, the scroll was gone. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. The temple was built, then destroyed. But among the mystics and wanderers of the desert, the legend of Solomon's final writing never died. They called it Sefer Or, the Book of Light. They said its verses could not be read with eyes alone. Only a heart purified by humility could understand them. To the proud, they appeared as riddles. To the meek, they became revelations. One passage, passed down orally among desert tribes, was said to be a fragment from the lost scroll. Do not seek heaven in the clouds, for it is hidden beneath your mercy. Do not look for God in temples of stone, for he walks within the breath of forgiveness. In time, many sought the scroll. Kings sent explorers. Priests prayed for visions. Some claimed to have seen it in dreams, glowing, unrolled by a radiant hand. Others said the scroll was not lost at all, but transformed, its words scattered into the souls of those willing to love selflessly. In the 2nd century before Christ, a scholar named Eleazar of Qumran wrote that he found references to the Book of Light among ancient fragments buried near the Dead Sea. His notes spoke of teachings resembling Solomon's final verses, mystical, tender, almost prophetic. The soul that forgives builds a kingdom unseen. The heart that listens commands angels. The wise man kneels before the child, for innocence is nearer to God than intellect. Eleazar vanished soon after writing this. His last recorded words were, "The light is not lost. It hides in men." By the time of Jesus' birth, the scroll of light had become more myth than memory. Yet in strange coincidence, or perhaps by divine design, the wisdom of the missing scroll seemed to reappear, not on parchment, but in a carpenter's son who spoke of love, mercy, and forgiveness. The priests who heard him wondered, was this the wisdom Solomon saw long ago? The echo of the king's prophecy rang faintly in their minds. There shall arise one who speaks as if heaven itself breathes through his lips. The scroll may have vanished, but its spirit lived on in every word that lifted the humble, healed the broken, and silenced the proud. Solomon's final teaching was never truly lost. It had only changed its form, waiting for the world to listen again. The sun sank low over the hills of Jerusalem, casting long, golden shadows across the valley where the temple once stood. The wind carried dust, silence, and something softer, a whisper, as if the stones themselves remembered. It had been centuries since King Solomon's voice was last heard, yet his teaching still drifted through time like light reflecting off ancient water. What he had written, what he had dreamed, what he had prayed for, it had never truly vanished. Every generation that came after him searched for that same secret. What is wisdom? And more importantly, how do we live it? Solomon's life had shown both the glory and the danger of divine understanding. He had touched heaven in his youth, yet struggled against pride in his later years. He had built wonders of the world, but learned too late that the greatest temple was not made of gold. It was made of gratitude, justice, and mercy. And perhaps that was why his last prayer was not for power or memory, but for the world to remember the meaning behind the light. When men forget my name, he had written, let them still walk in my wisdom. When my throne is dust, let my truth still build their homes. Time honored that prayer in quiet ways. The scroll of light lost to the world became a legend, but its essence found a home in countless hearts. It reappeared not as ink, but as understanding. In every act of kindness, every word of forgiveness, every moment when truth triumphed over greed. When Jesus later walked the earth, his words often carried a strange familiarity, as though echoing the same divine current that once guided Solomon. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. It was as if heaven had taken Solomon's wisdom, refined it, and breathed it back into the world through love. Through the centuries, kings rose and fell, empires came and went, but Solomon's message endured. Not in thrones or scrolls, but in the human spirit's endless thirst for meaning. His story was not just about the wisdom of one man, it was about the journey of all who seek light in a world of shadows. Even now, when someone forgives an enemy, when a ruler rules with compassion, when a teacher uplifts rather than commands, Solomon's lost teachings live again. The eternal wisdom he once sought under the stars now dwells quietly in the hearts of ordinary people. Because true wisdom was never meant to be locked in libraries or guarded by priests. It was meant to walk among us. Wisdom, Solomon had written in his final words, is not found in temples but in tears that heal. Not in crowns, but in kindness. Not in thrones of ivory, but in the hearts that refuse to hate. And so, though the scroll of light may never be found, the world still shines with its reflection. The voice of Solomon is not lost. It is heard whenever humanity chooses understanding over judgment, peace over pride, and truth over power. That is the final mystery, the last teaching. That divine wisdom never dies. It only changes form, waiting for those who are ready to listen. And somewhere beyond the veil of time, if you listen closely, you can almost hear him say, "The wise do not seek eternity in stone. They build it in love."